Good morning, everyone, and also good morning to the panelists of today. And I'm very excited to have these great ladies with me today. So I have Tove Nordstrom, sorry for the pronunciation if it's wrong, Director of Social Entrepreneurship Forum in Sweden. Then we also have Justina Lukaševičiūtė from Lithuania, Ministry of Social Security and Labor, where she's the advisor. And also we have Dace Akule from board member and consultant from Latvia. So welcome to Lithuania, and I'm very excited to have you today. And I would like to start with just like a general view of social entrepreneurship and how social enterprises function in each of our countries, right? So let's start with you, Justina. How would you describe the current situation of social entrepreneurship in Lithuania?
Probably, if I have to describe it in one word, Simona, I would say that in a process of growing and understanding what it is at the first time, um, it's I would have to face it that that's not very different from other countries in Europe, that quite often we just do not identify it ourselves as a social enterprise. We would do the work and then just say, whatever it is, I'll just doing what I'm doing. But at the same time, we faces then the challenges of, so where should I look for support? Where should I look for help, and what should be my partners? What's the environment I'm acting in? Because of misidentification or just trying to understand who I am at the moment, we face these problems. And then on the good side, I'm very excited that in the Fenian case, we're actually growing and starting to look up and starting to build more and more tools to help each other and to understand and to move forward quite fast from idea that I'm just doing whatever I'm doing to idea that maybe I should put myself in one of the boxes, or maybe I could be more than just social enterprise. Maybe I'm quite a full bucket list of things that I could be, and I just need to identify it and then classify my personal activities as an organization.
And you said with the identification that there's kind of a problem. Is it a problem from the side of the social enterprises, or is it a problem from more the political level, right? Because we have this big discussion in Lithuania that we don't have the social business status, right? So is it concerning that, or is it more with the social enterprises themselves?
Well, probably it's a simpler question to what was first, the chicken or the egg, because we would have from both sides. From one side, when we looked from the state position, we would say, okay, so what is social enterprise? Well, how many organizations we have in this title? What do they do? What their legal specificalities they would need in the Lithuanian environment? And then we come to other problem of organizations who also say, okay, so I'm thinking I'm a social enterprise, but maybe not. So I say that this problem composed from both sides. From the state position or legal legislation part, we have problem of trying to scope it and somehow measure it, how to build this thing, and that we cannot move forward until we have these measurements. As rather, we would probably do more harm trying to set this in the law or in any legislation part without environment setting us the scope, so what they are and what do they need to do. And then we look to the environment, and environment says, okay, not all of us understand that we are social enterprise, and also this there's this communicational problem of quite often we see organizations who would say, I do good things, I don't want to be identified as business because business is bad, business about the profit and things that does not go along with me, I just want to do good. And that is something that we need to outgrow, because probably that's one of the things that we just got from the history and from the stereotypical idea what is business, what is entrepreneur, what is the generally profit sector. And so there's additional challenge. So when we move from that, or at least in the process of trying to understand that everything is okay with the profit, and I can be enterprise, and at the same time I can do good and take care, put more attention, more my personal probably or as an organizational attitude into the benefit and the measurements I can do for the society, for the world, or just in my area community, than just the profit. So chicken or the egg, probably both at the same time, and bit by bit we'll come to conclusion when we'll just come to agreement. But it will be a long term. I don't have this dream of that it will happen overnight. We actually have to talk. We have to set on, measure, understand ourselves in the sector and in the legislation part.
So you work for the Ministry of Social Security and Labor. So what is the ministry's role in fostering social entrepreneurship in Lithuania?
Okay, so probably, as I just mentioned, that we have identification problems. Probably, as most of the Europeans say, we have skills challenges. There's a gap of the skills that we need, and as a ministry, together with Social Security Fund Agency, we say that we see ourselves as main role working with gaining competence, working, identifying, and building the sector, try helping organizations to identify themselves and put in one or few boxes, saying which one of those going just like NGOs, which one will go and will be more social enterprises. Some of them might be in both cases. Some of them will be working more with the innovations and the others with services. So we try to pull out that in one pool and try to actually give them tools and support so they could actually find their position, identify, and then move in their that side, or if they need a wider position, but then knowing what the tools and what support they can get from the state and from the agencies.
Do you have any insight how does those tools help? So does the social enterprises then think, oh, I'm actually maybe more NGO, or do they lean more towards the business side?
Um, I couldn't say that we have hard tools at the moment. The data that I would say that it's definitely going one or the other way. But we do see the view that more organizations would come to idea that I might be more than just an NGO, or I could be both of the things, and it's okay. I don't have to choose to be only NGO or to be only social enterprise. And most importantly, I feel that we are going in a positive direction of understanding that there's nothing wrong with being enterprise or thinking about the profit and thinking as a business rather than just as a good deed organization.
All right, thank you. And now I would like to move a little bit from Lithuania to Latvia, right? We like to compare each other quite a lot. So I'd like to ask you that. So, what is the current situation in Latvia? How would you describe the ecosystem for social entrepreneurship?
Well, in Latvia's case, it's quite different from Lithuania in the sense that we have a status defined by law, what actually social enterprise means, and also what rights and what duties that the enterprise has. And that law came into effect in April 2018. So we have 4.5 years of seeing how this law works and how many enterprises have managed to get that status, how they have begun their operations and what they struggle with. And we will probably focus on later in that question about the challenges that the social enterprises are now facing. But we know what time we have just gone through and what huge, no word to describe, situation we have in Ukraine right now. So these enterprises also are affected by that situation. But in the general picture, I would say that as conventional businesses, there is data that most of them, 80% of them, don't survive the first 3 years. Good ideas don't end up in actually living longer than that. So if you look at the Latvian social enterprise law and the 4.5 years, this is a very, very crucial time for social enterprises in Latvia right now. For many, it's a question of survival. For some, it's already end of the day. And it's a big, big challenge also with regard to the next years, as there's this EU-funded grant for social enterprises that will face a gap of maybe 1 or 2 years. So there will be that funding gap on top of all the other challenges. So it's a really, really decisive moment, I would say, for the ecosystem. And with regard to what colleagues said on the profits, the Latvian law actually says that the social enterprise cannot have profits, or the profits cannot be taken out as dividends. They have to be put back in the company or
100%.
for the public good. So from my perspective, that's going back to the content that colleagues were touching on in the previous presentations and conversations. That's an element of a unbalanced heading towards burnout solution for social enterprises. Because as a board member of some of these consultative boards for social enterprises, I hear that a lot from these people, that they are struggling with the same kind of things like you said. They want to do good, but at the same time, they do need to make ends meet and sustain themselves and their families and their teams. And in many crises, they're also very responsible to their teams. Like the conventional companies were laying off, firing teams en masses in COVID time. Many of these social enterprises didn't do it. They know what it means for them to let go a person who's a special target group, who needs extra help to be able to actually work. So I think when you have all these additional duties for these social enterprises, entrepreneurs, it's if you take away the cushion that they could take out at least a little bit of that profit to take good care of themselves, I think it's a thing that should be fixed in the legislation, and the countries that don't have this legislation yet, I think it actually gives you some benefit. You can maybe take better good care of yourself or your companies.
That's very interesting, and we definitely will circle back to that, the issues related with the social business status. But before that, I also just wanted to ask, what are the newest initiatives in Latvia, despite the status that was there 4.5 years ago?
Well, as I mentioned, this grant competition, which was a really big, let's say, boost for many social enterprise ideas to actually be tested, piloted, and also expanded in the case of some NGOs who had started to work in these things and then got the status of the enterprise and then could get the grant and work with that. So that phasing out, obviously the Social Enterprise Association, all the other, let's say, people who are really like in the ministry that's responsible for the sector in Latvia, they are trying to look for new ways to help also in that gap time and also help the new ones that are now being established. One thing is these smaller grant schemes or pitching competitions that the municipalities are organizing together with commercial banks. And another bigger thing is something called socially responsible public procurement, which means that municipalities and state institutions are urged to look for services and products that they can buy from companies that are social enterprises, where there would be competitions that are solely made for them, or that they choose applicants, give better points in evaluation for applicants who include social enterprises as cooperation partners. Like, for example, a municipality wants to build roads, and the company that comes together with a social enterprise that employs people who used to be in a prison, who need to be reintegrated into work and life after prison time, that gets more points than the others. So this is a big thing, and a lot of work has been done to put together the criteria, to work with the municipalities, also state institutions, to know how this tool can be used. And that can be helpful. For example, if you look at social enterprises who have been producing food or giving catering services during COVID time, lots of troubles, right? With non-existent events and people not being able to go to cafes, etc. So why not municipality and state institution, instead of going to normal companies, why don't they go to a social enterprise that, for example, employs disabled people to bake the cakes and all the other goody things that we would want to eat, or a company that employs people who make crafts and nice design products that could be used as corporate gifts for, I don't know, some presidency events. Why not go there? And if it starts in the state institutions and municipalities, it can also make a big change for the whole system, not just a small company.
Is there any type of commitment plan to put on municipalities that this is the percentage they have to outsource to social enterprises?
I think that's where it's heading, but the beginning is to start testing So it's just a new tool as we speak. It's now being tested, but for sure, why would we waste time on putting in place a tool that no one would want to use, right? So now the work has been done to work out the criteria to also train the municipalities how to how to make this call for procurement, what they need to take care of, how to evaluate the applicants, etc., etc. So for sure, the municipalities will also, and the state institutions will also at some point have to face that this cannot be just a tool that they spend time on creating, and then it's just something that we can put in a nice slide for the social enterprise day that it exists, but has it been used? So for sure, and I'm sure that the people who are fighting for social enterprises will lobby for the municipalities and state institutions to actually use it.
Yeah, that's very interesting to hear, and I'm sure we will be following the news or how it's developing in Latvia. Moving on to Tove, I would like you also to ask a little bit and elaborate on this new initiative that Social Entrepreneurship Forum took lately on achieving SDGs and strengthened the social entrepreneurship ecosystem in Sweden. So could you elaborate a little bit on this initiative, on the timeline, how did it start, and what will it entail in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to similar challenges that we've heard from Lithuania and Latvia about sort of a lack of knowledge about the sector, lack of structure, lack of a strong ecosystem, lack of funding, all sorts of issues over the years. It's a underdeveloped sector in Sweden, definitely. There's similar challenges in terms of the balance between sort of the NGO sector and the business sector, and a lot of social entrepreneurs and social enterprises sort of ending up in the middle, and they don't fit in the NGO world with funding and support, and they also don't fit in the business world with the funding, bank loans, support. And this sort of area in the middle is sort of not a no man's land, but it's there's way less support. But there's us, Social Entrepreneurship Forum, and there's a lot of other similar organizations that are sort of trying to work in this middle area. But because it's not structured and there's not a strong ecosystem, we're all sort of challenged by being small organizations trying to do a lot. We're all we end up being competitors competing for the same sort of project funding, and we also get caught in between the bigger systems. So a lot of the work that we were doing was good, but it was smaller project. It was short-term funding. It was sort of project initiatives, and both from sort of grant money, but also from governmental agencies that were giving out money to us and to others to do initiatives like accelerator programs or support actions for social enterprises and social entrepreneurs. But we just felt that it was we were all working in silos. We were all sort of doing similar things, but not together, which was the main problem. So it was sort of, just, smaller initiatives that were good, but they didn't go towards a sort of a joint vision or a joint focus. So we were doing a few of these projects a few years back, and we were asked by the Swedish Innovation Agency what we wanted to do as sort of a continuation of our projects. And there were 9 organizations, so Social Entrepreneurship Forum is just one of them. And we and the other 8 basically got together and said, we don't want to just get small pots of funding to do another project. We want to do something that we can do together to actually strengthen the ecosystem and actually strengthen the support structure, rather than for us to just continue doing small projects here and there. And they accepted our sort of request. So it was initiated as a project, but we're hoping that we're trying to look at it as a bit of an anti-project. So we don't want it to just be a normal project that has a start, a bit of work and activities, you write a report, and then the project ends and there's nothing more. So we want it to be a project that is sort of start of, you know, the beginning of what comes next. So our idea is for it to actually become a long-term partnership with us, the organizations involved, but also others. It's not supposed to be a club for us. It's supposed to be a network, a organization that others can be part of, so that it actually creates a stronger support structure. So that's the sort of background to why we
So
ended
looking
up doing.
into the timeline, when are you launching if it hasn't launched yet?
Yeah.
And how long this project, which is not really a project, will
Yeah.
last?
Well, we're in the middle of the project, and we have because we wanted to be a bit of an anti-project. As I said, we didn't want to just do stuff and then launch something at the end and then it dies. So we launched already last year as a sort of initiative, as a network. We launched a website where we share interviews and inspiration and reports to sort of try to be a one-stop shop for social entrepreneurship in Sweden. But we've also very recently launched a future agenda, we call it, where we've got 10 points that are sort of the key points that we see are needed for Sweden to accelerate the sector and to improve the sector. So we're doing sort of smaller launches as part of the project, but we're hoping to be able to launch as more of a set organization during next year, and which is also the end of the project. So for us to be able to continue, we need to also have launched as an organization.
Could you elaborate a little bit on those 10 steps or 10 points for the social enterprises? What does it entail?
Yeah, I mean, that also comes back to our idea of not being a project that just maps stuff or, you know, does reports. We want to actually look at what's already out there. Reports are written every year and there's always the same recommendations, but then there's no one to actually take the recommendations and do something about them. And we want it to be different. So we are gathering reports, recommendations from different mappings, interviews that we've done, that other organizations have done, to actually look at what are the needs in Sweden. And we have similar needs that we've heard from Latvia and Lithuania. And we've tried to put them together into one sort of agenda with these points. So they're basically based on previous reports over the last few years and interviews with the people in the sector, interviews with entrepreneurs, and surveys and things like that. And we come back to the same issues all the time, which is usually funding. There's also sort of networks and partnerships. So there's various reasons. We've also tried to link our agenda to a strategy that our previous government launched in 2018 that was focused on social innovation and social entrepreneurship. And they had 5 areas that strategy focused on, which was funding, impact measurement, networks and knowledge sharing, those kind of things. So we've tried to map our agenda to those areas as well. So we've got 10 points, but 5 of them are about funding because it's a big chunk. But then we also have points about the other ones about impact measurements and setting up support structures and having a strong ecosystem. So they're a bit varied, but.
So you mentioned that the 10 points were based on the 5 areas that were identified before by the government, as far as I understand. So then do you have the policymakers' support on this, on implementing those 10 points?
So basically, our agenda is a call to our new government to actually pick this back up, because the government that set the strategy are no longer.
Okay.
So since September, we have a new government, and different to Latvia and Lithuania. We don't have a governmental sort of support for the sector. We don't have a minister with this focus. We don't even have a minister with a social economy focus. So when EU leaders in I think February or March this year met in Paris to talk about how to implement the EU's social economy action plan, Sweden were not there. So most of the countries I think were there. There were Sweden and maybe 2 other countries that wasn't represented. So we don't have a governmental person or even department focused on this, which makes it harder, definitely. But that's also why we try to put the 10 concrete actions together to make the new government aware of the fact that there are easy things, or not easy, but there are very clear things to do that we think could improve the sector. But we're also trying to look at using the agenda on sort of regional level, because there are regional offices and municipalities that have a stronger focus on social entrepreneurship. So we're also trying to go that way. If national government aren't as supportive, then we're trying locally as well.
Thank you, Tove. You kind of laid a good ground for our next theme, which is, we are here to discuss the resilience of social enterprises. And sometimes we need to convince policymakers why social enterprises are resilient, right? So let's discuss a little bit about the changes and tendencies, if you've noticed and seen anything during lately, the crisis that we had, right, with COVID and the war in Ukraine. Have you noticed any tendencies on changes how the social enterprises adapted to the situation? Maybe let's start with you, Tove.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I was saying earlier, because social enterprises always end up somewhere sort of in the middle of NGOs and business, they also get caught in between when there's a crisis. So, for example, during COVID, the government were giving out financial support to some NGOs and some businesses, but social enterprises, if they get caught in between, they might not get that kind of support because they sort of get lost in the middle. So a lot of them have struggled, but a lot of them have also, I mean, they're very reactive, a lot of them, so they pick up on needs in society. I mean, we had in Sweden, we had maybe even a bigger crisis around the refugee crisis in 2015 when we had a lot of refugees coming to Sweden. So there were a lot of social enterprises back then, either setting up to support refugees or changing their work to help more refugees, similar with Ukraine now. So I think the main changes that they do is to be responsive and reactive to issues and crises that are happening, and to support them because they're sort of passion and cause driven rather than financially driven.
Yeah, and would you say that social enterprises are more resilient than traditional businesses, and how, if they are?
Both yes and no. Not financially, probably, because not all of them will have a sustainable business model potentially. They might also struggle with other kinds of funding. They also, as I was saying earlier, they get caught in the middle, so they might not get the support as normal businesses do. But I would say that they're resilient in the sense that they're very they're passion driven. So, and they're driven by social issues or environmental issues, or issues and challenges in our society. So they're not necessarily driven by consumer trends or other trends that are more sort of business or industry based. They do something because of the passion, so they're in it for the long run often, because social issues and environmental issues usually don't go away very quickly. So I think from a passion sense, they're definitely resilient, but they struggle in the more in the financial sense potentially.
Right, thank you. And what about you, Justina? Have you noticed any changes or tendencies?
As my colleague from Latvia said it, that it's obvious that in some cases they're more resilient. Firstly, because they're passion driven, and that's fact. They would think twice or triple or quarter times before laying out people, before doing anything, as rather their first focus is about people they're working or their clients rather than the profit, and that makes them way more resilient in this way, and they will do even if there will be going in a minus part. There's no benefit, there's nothing you can do now, but you're still going. And in Lithuanian case, we have those stories when it doesn't matter when it started with pandemia, then we had a crisis on the border, then we had a crisis with the Ukraine war, and those were the ones that first come, and they would not ask how, they would say, how can we help? We want to help, and what can we do to help? And from the state side, we feel very strongly that social enterprises, NGOs, citizen civil society organizations in general, they would come first without even asking. They would come and say, what can I do? I want to be part of it. And then at the same side, then we have the problem of financing, so it's way more difficult. And also, I would probably what my colleague said, additional to what they can now say, because the challenges are similar. One more that we have is the challenges in management, because we do lack, the sector lacks management skills, as you're trying to compose the tools that you're using in one sector and the other one, and then you're but in the middle, and you have to just do the juggling with all those tools and find the best solution. And then the management part, at some point, they would probably happens, it gets in the back, and then you faces the challenges of finances, of situation, and you want to help, but you're not very equipped to go fully with it. But in practice, we can definitely say that they're way more resilient and they way more active in actions, and they will firstly do to help people than they think of the situation that they're putting into, which comes a bit in a negative side where they're acting and then doing thinking what's happened. But in general, when we set on it's we know that this is the side where it comes to support and where we could rely on in actions, and where we should focus our support also. Um, in the pandemia period, at the same time, we had very clear rules what to do if you're NGO and what to do if you're a business entity. And then this middle part were quite difficult. And then from our side and from our ministry side, we had a lot of consultations with those social enterprise entities. For some of them, we were not able to help, but then for the others, you are trying to, somehow maneuver that they would fit in one or the other side. And in that case, that day it was the situation when we said, okay, maybe good that we don't have legal legislation what is social enterprise, because then it would be definite that there's no way out how to maneuver in between those. When you don't have, it means that we have this a bit of freedom to look, maybe we could go to one or the other, and then provide support in that case.
That's very interesting, and of course, I would like to ask the same of you, Dasa. And also, now we also heard that the problem was in the crisis, and is that the social enterprises are somewhere in between. And since we don't have the definition, then we are a little bit lost. But you did so. Can you see also a little bit of insight there? How were they more resilient, and how that social business status helped or didn't help in the time of crisis?
I'm not sure that it helped that we had this status, and I'm not sure that what I see from the companies where I'm one of the consultative board members, and also the stories that I hear about how social enterprises have managed to live through these 3 years, that it has made such a big difference. I would say, like I said before, social enterprises, I think, are entrepreneurs who have this extra layer of responsibility. But at the end of the day, there's still a person who wants to do good, but also wants to work in a business environment. So when we look back at the COVID time, many social enterprises had to change the focus just as conventional companies had to do. For example, one of the companies that I'm working with is upcycling brand Zīle. it's a one-person upcycling designer who makes pre-loved clothes and creates new garments. So obviously she had to close the store, she had to move to online sales, like many other companies did in the sector. Another company, Swimbee, that is making tailor-made swimwear from recycled fabrics, and they switched, like many other companies, to producing face masks when COVID started, right? Another trend is that despite all the challenges, after people were so packed in their homes without being able to meet up and have meetings, etc., people are going back to willing to learn new things, spend their time in an interesting way. So many of these social enterprises, like these ones that I just mentioned, also started master classes where people could gather, make their own clothes from used garments, etc., etc., make their own face masks, whatnot, you know. So that's one thing. Another totally different sector, food provision, like in COVID. In the beginning, do we remember when it was all locked down and we didn't know how to get the things that we need in our fridges? And then in the beginning, one of the social enterprises I work with is Zweig. It's an online market that brings together rural farmers and consumers in the capital. So the farmers can sell their food via online market to the consumers in the capital. So in the beginning, because they had this system in place, they had steep increase in demand because the big companies, the supermarkets, didn't have these online programs already. So if the Zweig LV team used to have around 10 people working before COVID started, then just in the first months of COVID, it went 5 times more, 50 people working, much larger premises needed, huge increase in the number of sales that they made, the new customers that they made. But quickly after the situation changed, the big supermarkets also understood that this is what they need to do. Otherwise, no one is buying what they have in their stores. The situation went down to normal. After a couple of months, the number of customers for this social enterprise was just like when COVID started. So, and as I said already in the beginning, with catering and cafe places for social enterprises, these things were really struggling in that time. So with Zweig, it was not the case, but even then we could really discuss whether that's a sustainable kind of, thing that we would like to see. Just a steep increase for a couple of months, lots of stress for the team to actually adapt, and they did. Obviously, that's a good point for them. But if that we cannot say, looking at the data, that it has brought them a new, let's say, group of niche of customers. Because as soon as the big companies could invest huge amounts of money marketing in that, of course, the people who used to go to Rimi, Maxima and whatnot, they just went to the online service for those big brands. So I would say, yes, they did adapt like normal conventional companies, but with different results. And I'm not sure that I would agree that social enterprises and social entrepreneurs are more resilient, because I think everyone is as human as we are, and with this extra layer of responsibility that social entrepreneurs have, I think they are actually more vulnerable. I was discussing this topic with one of my colleagues who is actually one of the main experts on social enterprises in Latvia, and this is the word that she used. She said they are more vulnerable, not more resilient, because of these things, that they are caring more for the team, willing to give up on their own needs in special circumstances. And that's a big red flag in some situations.
So how would you think that, how would you see the future of social entrepreneurship, social enterprises in Latvia, and what do they need to become more resilient?
I think after these, let's say, 4 or 5 years of test phase, things will have to calm down. I mean, the good ideas, the good teams, the good work that has to continue will continue. But for some, it will be an interesting phase when they tested things and things didn't work out. Let's say didn't work out in the long term. Maybe 1, 2, 3 years, but not more than that. But in general, I mean, despite what I've said, I'm not totally pessimistic about the sector, right? I'm just showcasing some of the challenges that are there. I think as overall, as us as a societies, we need to move. We understand that we need to move away from these egocentric approaches where we look at the businessman who's just going for the profit, which is not actually true, right? I mean, it's a black-white picture of the world is not helpful to anyone. So we are all understanding that we are doing lots of harm to other people and the environment if we continue to work like we've done until now. So we all together will move into this more eco-centric way of working in our economies, which means that not just the businessmen, but also the teams, also the environment, all the supply chain actors, also the client is on the same level. So the client doesn't have the right to shit all over the place because you're the one who's supplying a service, you know, where the, you know, client is the king. It's not, it shouldn't be. No one has the right to abuse anyone, even in relationships like that. And I think when we move as societies towards that goal, also the social enterprises have a totally different place there, a better place there. And maybe in that situation, social enterprises will be more resilient because they already now work in that mindset. Only the framework, the legal framework, and the way that we look at companies is a bit different and not good for them, not yet.
So looking more into the future, would you say the legal status is there to stay, or should it not be there anymore?
No, it should be there, but I think there should be some adjustments, especially with regard to some percentage of the profit that the entrepreneur should be allowed to take out, to take better care of themselves.
Thank you. And I also have the same question for you, Tove and Justina. So let's start with Justina. What can the ministry do to support resilient entrepreneurial activities in the future?
Okay, so probably what we all agree, because from what I heard today, we can identify similar challenges that we see in the sector, that we need to respond to it so we could actually build that better resilience in the future. One thing, which probably your story about the food service company showed me, identified that one thing is the yes, in a specific situation, the need came into and then the clients came into, but then the situation changed and everything gone back to. And this identifies for me that we do lack competences of management and selling ourselves. It's not that they did poor job not receiving, but there probably was something that they could do to keep the clients that came into, that they would be loyal to the new services they received, counting, thinking that, okay, maybe I don't need to come back fully to this, my previous habits, what I did and where to go. So these are one of the competences that we have to work on. Generally looking, we can say that there is a gap of competence that needed in the sector and that the sector has already. So one, and probably in my case and from my interest rate, the most important part is working with the competences, coming with firstly the management competences and management tools that needs to get in the sector so they could actually work and face the challenges they get not only in the crisis but generally with their daily activities and upscaling their activities, working, continuing what they did. The other thing is competence working with data, digital tools, as rather quite often what we saw also in COVID period, that we do use a lot of digital tools, but we are not prepped to work with that, or they are not adapted to a user. Also, huge challenge coming with the personal data, GDPR and everything what comes into. We quite often have it and we don't know how to work with it, how to use it properly, and how to secure that it's actually safe and sound with all the legislation, all the tools. And the third part would be going about the educational parts and relations with the greenfield, with this side. So that's the competent side, one thing. The other thing, we should think more about how to help in legislation rather than, in some cases, I think the most important position from the ministry is do no harm. And if we're doing something, make sure that that won't make worse than it was. So they use that as inspiration for innovations, as rather in our country, it's the same as probably in Latvia. Innovation is the field where we can actually work. We have the tools. We just have to make sure that there is a push through in it. So our agency that we're working on, the Competence Center, which is aimed for innovation, national level and EU level, will be one of the main keys that will help not only for enterprises, NGOs that are looking for their position, whether they should move in one or the other side, but also municipalities, also institutions to find the position, how to use it, how to communicate, and where to find the new partner, which is not only a business entity that might be looking more into a challenge, into a person that needs help rather than just working and providing the services. So that would be short. I could go further and further, but I know that our time is coming to an end.
Yes, thank you. And then the last question for you, Tove. So what is your vision of social entrepreneurship forum? How can you build more resilient social enterprises?
Yeah, I'll be quick. But I think our main focus is to strengthen the ecosystem, just to strengthen the actual sector for social entrepreneurship. But I also want to say that by strengthening the ecosystem, we don't want to isolate social enterprises or social entrepreneurs. The whole idea with being resilient and actually solving all of our all of our societal issues is to not just put all of this work on social entrepreneurs. It's not up to social enterprises to fix all of our problems. It's up to all of us. So I think one of our focuses by strengthening the ecosystem also means that we have to strengthen cross-sectoral partnerships. Business sector needs to be more involved. Public sector needs to be working with social enterprises to actually fix social issues. So I think that's one of the main things to make them last, to make them not burn out, and to make them actually sufficient and long-lasting, will be to collaborate with other partners and to make sure that that's cross-sectoral so that everyone gets involved. It's not private businesses can't be doing all bad things and then social enterprises have to come and fix things. It's up to everyone to actually try to solve our social and environmental problems, and that should be done in partnerships. So that will be one of our key focuses as well, to make sure that the ecosystem allows for cross-sectoral collaborations and partnerships.
Thank you very much, and thank you for participating today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.